Nice to be here with you all. I'm a long, long way from home. Any Husky fans in here? Okay, no. Any Washington State Cougar fans in here? Okay, then we're all right then. That's all right. I woke up this morning with pretty severe anxiety, realizing I was going to teach a math class at the end of 2 sessions, and with the goal of not putting too many people to sleep. Before I start, I wanted to just touch on something Kevin talked about with communication this morning. I think it's interesting how you can arrive at similar ideas without talking to each other, because I would never talk to Kevin about how to win volleyball games. But something that he talked about really spoke to me, which was when you're dealing with confrontation on your team, and the word Kevin used is carefrontation. And before that, he talked about calling out your teammates, which is something I hear talked about a lot amongst the college ranks and the club ranks. And it's such an interesting turn of phrase to call out a teammate. You know, if you imagine we're all in this together, and then I'm going to go ahead and call you out of our group for something that you're doing, when the reality is that teammate is already out. They've been out for a while. Something they've been doing has kind of cast them outside of this group that we've built. And my job as a teammate is I got to bring them back. And so when we're in our gym and we're talking to our leaders, we talk about not calling out teammates, but bring them back. Hey, you got to go talk to Susie here and bring her back into the fold, because she's off doing her own thing here, and it's not good. And so, I don't know, it was similar to what Kevin said, I think, with how do you approach conflict and put it in a way and reframe it in a way that that'll help your team. So it's just something I think is really important that Kevin, unfortunately, is doing right with his program. So. Amongst many other things. I really hoped you were going to come up here and bomb, but I wasn't surprised that you didn't. So Kevin's team's been on a tear lately. Okay, just so I can get a lay of the land here, where are my people here who maybe have a background in math or enjoy volleyball statistics and are going to email me later with all the mistakes I made? Okay, a few of you. Ooh. Who here does just enough to get by? You know, they have someone on the bench taking stats, that player who dances too much on the sideline, you make her do passing stats or something? I don't know. Okay. Who here it might as well be the moon to me. I gave up math in high school. I've got no interest. I'm just sitting through. Okay, and then a bunch of people who don't want to admit where they're at on that spectrum. Okay. Why should we care about volleyball statistics? I'll make my argument here for why I think this matters. I think everyone in this room probably enjoys winning. Some of us do it more than others, but volleyball statistics can help you win more. And if you're doing everything in your team's within your power to help your team win, then this is one of the areas that you can improve. I think volleyball is immensely complicated. It's a very interdependent game. You know, we've got 3 touches that are all connected. Unless Jenna Gray is throwing it down on 2, Kevin, which I still want to argue is illegal. 3 touches that are very connected, and it's hard to isolate who's helping and who's hurting and what stats matter and what stats are kind of noise. So for me, statistics were a way to organize this game that's really complicated and to see it more simply. This one was big for me. I'm not sure how many of you would consider yourself highly emotional coaches or at either one point or another in your careers, but I was extremely sensitive, very emotional in my earlier coaching days, and so understanding the statistics of the game helped me to manage that. I was surprised less when things happened, when we won matches, lost matches, when a player didn't hit a ball the way I thought she should. Understanding the statistics helped me. So if you're someone who struggles with that, I would kind of point you in this direction and say this can give you a lot of peace of mind with your coaching. One thing I try and tell my players a lot is, hey, it's between you and the game. What you're working on right now is between you and the game of volleyball. It's not about me and you. It's about you and the game is trying to tell you something, and you're not really listening, and I'm trying to translate it for you. And these are the things that you need to understand. And I try and be objective, you know, as often as I can. And statistics help me with that. They help me to evaluate my athletes more accurately and more fairly, and not give players roles that, you know, they're not equipped to handle just because I like them, which I tend to do more often than not. And then maybe here's the last argument. Whether or not you choose to understand statistics is totally up to you, but you're going to be affected by it regardless. And sticking your head in the sand might not be the best strategy to really be successful. And so that would be my argument, just to kind of invest what time you can in kind of the basic stats. So we've got a spectrum of kind of people here on the math realm, and I'm going to do my best to try and have a little bit of everything for everyone. So sometimes it might seem a little basic, sometimes it might be over your head, but we're trying to give something to everyone here. Okay, so that's a little bit of the why. Now we're talking about the how. How does statistics help us win? First thing, you need to know what are the standards that your team needs to reach in order to win games. What do we have to pass? What do we have to hit in this league or in this region in order to be successful? And knowing those standards can help you to figure out, are we good enough to win a lot of matches? And so that's the first thing. Second, help us evaluate our athletes. Like I already mentioned, you're looking at this team of players that you don't know yet or that you're trying to learn, and you need to understand what they're capable of doing. And then also, how do we manage our time in practice? We all have limited time, like Kevin talked about, and you need to use it efficiently. And volleyball statistics can help you there. And maybe the last thing that we hopefully get out of this is maybe a few tips and tricks to help you make good choices about what system you're going to run and what decisions you're going to make in a match with rotations or lineups or matchups. We'll try and give you something there. So maybe 3 goals that we walk out of this with. Understand a little bit more the standards that you need to reach. Understand how to evaluate your players and design your practices. And then maybe third here, just being good about our systems and our lineup decisions. Lofty goals here, but we're going to go for it, okay? All right. I don't know how you look at the game when you watch the game of volleyball, but when I watch the game of volleyball, this is kind of how I picture it in my head mathematically. It's the greatest and sickest game of heads and tails you've ever seen. And the reason I see it like that is because margins of winning and losing points are really thin. And so, for example, I'm going to say in 2016, you weren't here yet, right, Kevin? That's right, because we won the league. And how many points overall in a year that we went, I think, 16-4 in the Pac-12, how many of all the points we played did we win? I'm going to take a guess here.
53.5%.
Oh, you have it on there. Let's ruin the punchline. Kind of surprising. You had Kevin's team last year who went 20-0 in the Pac-12 and really dominant, didn't get past 3 sets many times, lots of 12s and 15 scores. And so you look, okay, they must have been really good. They have to have won at least 75% of all the points to go 20-0 and 34-1. But surprisingly, they only won 55.6% of all the points they played. And so, like I said, pretty sick game of heads or tails. The difference between being 20-0 and not, being a 500 team is 5% of all the points they played. And that's the kind of margins that you're working with in the game of volleyball. I'm going to use some language. I'm going to call it side out and point score. Side out, we all know, is when we're receiving the serve. When I reference point score, it means we are serving the ball back at our opponents. And so when you are initiating serve, on average, you're going to win 4 out of 10. So your point score percentage is going to be 40%. This is where it gets scary when I start using numbers. I'm going to lose some of you, okay? When we're receiving the serve on average, it's 60%. It can be much worse, as my team knows, than 60%. 6 out of 10, those are just general averages in the game of volleyball. So if you spend half the game with a 60% advantage and half the game with a 40% advantage, you're about 50-50. Just a little graphic if that wasn't clear. Okay, so the most important stat to know about your team is your side out percentage and your point score, or you can say your opponent's side out percentage. It has the highest correlation, that's a terrible math word, to winning. So you need to know how to track your side out percentage and your point score percentage. And small improvements inside out have a huge effect on the outcome of your season. And so we'll talk about it kind of simply here. Lots of numbers, very scary. If we side out at 50%, and Kevin's team sides out at 50%, as if that's possible, we're going to go 50%. We're going to win half the games. We're going to go 15 and 15 over the course of a season. If we get 1% better at side out, our win percentage doesn't go up 1%. It goes up about 4%. And now our season is a 16 and 14 season. Let's see if we got this. If we get a little bit better, now we are 1% better inside out, and our opponents are still siding out at 50%. We're 2% better inside out. Now our win percentage jumps to 59%, 18 and 12. If we get 5% better, all of a sudden that number jumps to 75%. By the way, any roulette players in here? You guys aren't going to confess anything to me. Any roulette players in here? Okay, those of you who are betting black and red, 47-53. So if you play a game of volleyball with roulette, you're going to lose a lot, just to try and help us out with that habit that some of us have. If you're 10% better than your opponents, then off you go. You're winning a ton. You're talking about league titles and beyond. Tracking side out can be really simple, and I'm going to give you the simplest form that I used when I was a club coach, and it was just me, or maybe I had one assistant or one parent who I just wanted to give them something to do so they'd stop talking. Really simple way to track your side out. You give someone a piece of paper, and you tell them to draw a circle when your opponents serve, and if you side out, they fill in that circle. If they don't, they leave it open and get ready to draw another circle. You'll be amazed at how quiet it'll keep parents. And when you're all said and done, it'll look something like this on a piece of paper. And then you can go through it. And this rotation, we had 4 filled-in circles and 1 open one. So we're 4 for 5, 80% in rotation 1. In rotation 2, we're 2 for 5, we're 40%. Rotation 3, we're 20%. 4. Overall, we're for all 6 rows. %. Good job. 60%, I think. This is the best way to start off if you're trying to dive into the world of side-out percentages. Start here and get some information and start looking at it, and you can know how you're doing in these rows. So the next question that I always get when I'm talking about statistics is, what's good? Keegan, what's good? What's a good number? My sister calls me once a week with this question, what's good? And so what I did here is I went through and I looked at the 5 Power 5 conferences, they call them, and I looked at a team that was at the top, a team that was in the middle, and a team was at the bottom, and looked at what their side-out percentage was and what their opponent's side-out percentage was, and then what that difference was. So if we're starting here at the top with Stanford, they sided out at 67.9. Their opponent sided out at 54.8. The difference there is 13.1% in the positive. Really, really good. If you were to have them play their season with these numbers, it was predicted that they would go 19 and 1. They actually went 20 and 0. I think that makes sense because, Kevin, you guys went 5 once. Yeah, and you won that. Good job. And as you go through this, you can see if you had these numbers and you ran it over 1,000 matches, what would your record be on average? That's the expected, and you can see the actuals are usually either right on or within 1. So when I talk about not being able to escape kind of your fate, I mean, this is it. If you side out at a certain rate and your opponent side out at another rate, you might get lucky here or there, but for the most part, it's who you are. You can see as you get into teams in the yellow, those are teams that are close to 500. They're siding out 57.9, Utah, for example, and opponents are siding out at 57. So that's only a difference of less than 1%, and so they're close to 500. Who had the biggest advantage on here? Come on, who's the best differential, side-out differential here? Kentucky, yep, by far. 17.8, really, really high. Questions about side out percentage and standards there before I keep going? Not seeing too many glassed over eyes yet. Hopefully this makes sense. Knowing your side out, knowing your opponent's side out is a big deal. Okay, this is probably a stat that you are taking. Just who's doing serve and pass statistics for their team? Who's doing it on a 3-point scale? 3, 2, 1, 0. And who does it on a 4-point scale? 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Bond does. It's pretty particular. Okay, so we're going to talk about how to track serving and passing, the things that I think are kind of at their bare bones, the most important. With passing, we use a 3-point scale, but at times we look at a 4-point scale. I think it can be a little bit of overkill. If you're doing club or high school, I think 3, 2, 1, 0 is going to tell you everything you need. Some people at higher levels like to have a 4-point scale, but this is enough, in my view. Tracking serving, aces, errors, and then a stat that I think is pretty important is your opponent passing average. And the way you would calculate that is, if I serve a ball and you pass it, if you can pass it, you're going to get, let's say, a 2 pass. You passed a 2. So now I, as a server, would give myself a 2. And then I would keep serving, and all the results would get added up and then averaged, and I would find out how tough of a server I am. And I like that number because I get to know beyond aces and errors. Aces and errors are usually, hopefully, only going to account for 10% of all your serves. So what's happening with the other 90 is something that you want to know. And so if someone has an opponent passing average that's low, it means that they're putting a lot of pressure on their opponents, even if they're not getting a ton of aces. But those 3 numbers, I think, can pretty much tell you who your best servers are. You can get them up to the line early and often, and that's kind of what I would recommend for just a general high school or club team. I'd say 3-point scale, these 3 numbers, and you're on your way. Next question is, phone call from my sister. Keegan, what's good? These are the top 10 teams in passing average, again, just in the Power 5. There's lots of other great passing teams in other conferences, but you can see what standards they're reaching. Penn State, 2.34, Stanford, 2.3. It's looking like anything over 2.23 is putting you in the highest level of passing on a 3-point scale, obviously higher for a 4-point scale. The 17 Open champions of Triple Crown. Anybody in Kansas City last weekend? Anybody in Kansas City coaching club? Any club coaches here? But not in Kansas City. Okay, so everyone else, high school or college? Okay, awesome. Top 17 Open club team, team out of Florida, top select volleyball club, they passed a 2.3, just to give you something that's tangible for your age group. Okay, these standards tend to be pretty consistent across all levels of the game. Serving, what do great serving teams do? Again, these are top 10 in ace percentage, which again doesn't tell the whole story, but it does tell one part of the story. These teams are getting lots of aces. So you're trying to look for teams that have a high ace percentage, and then probably a somewhat comparable or lower error percentage. Pitt might be the only team on here who makes more aces than errors. That's what the top teams look like. This is a standard that I think you could be a little bit higher in the high school and club volleyball. You can be a 1-to-1 ace to error team, no question. You can be even higher than that. I've seen it for many, many club teams. So when we talk about, can we get our ace and error percentage to be close for the high school and club level? Absolutely. Lots of 14, 15, 16-year-old teams where that's doable and something you should aspire to. All right, we're cruising. Attacking. Things that we keep track of that I think are bare bones that you got to know. Kills, error percentage, how often you get blocked. This is not our team getting stuff blocks. This is how often we get stuffed. And then our hitting efficiency. We break up these two because we think that making errors is a worse mistake than getting stuff blocked in our gym. We talk about it a lot. We're okay getting stuffed. We have a chance to cover that ball. But hitting it out, there's nothing we can do about that. We're hitting it in the net, which hopefully doesn't happen a lot. So we like to know the difference between those two when we talk about with our hitters. Are they someone who's getting blocked a lot? Are they someone who's hitting out a lot? It's a very different story in our gym. Who gets or uses or has heard per set statistics? She gets 4.5 kills per set. She gets 12.2 digs per set. You guys use that familiar in the high school game. What's wrong with per set statistics? Why are they kind of misleading? They're inconsistent? Yeah, especially on my team this year. Yeah, really inconsistent. There's another reason, though. The amount of sets they played, getting warmer. Good. You could start in a different row, and they could get less opportunities to hit, for example. Or if you sub them in at any point during the game, if it's for 1 point or 2 points, then it counts as a set played. Can throw off your statistics drastically. One more reason. What do we play to in the fifth set? 15. So if your team goes 5 a lot, what happens to your per set statistics? They're going to take a nosedive because now they're counting a set that was played to 25 the same as a set that's played to 15. So if you're using per set statistics, I think they're really misleading. You need to be careful about using those as standards for your team that you want to meet. Those of you who are, again, a little more curious about what's going on beyond just kills, errors, stuff blocks, you might want to look into this, assigning some value to actions that you know are worthwhile. Okay, again, we're going to kill, hopefully, around 40% of all of our attacks. We're going to hit, hopefully, around 10% out or into the block. That's 50%. What's going on with the other 50%? It's half the story. You need to know what's going on with your team. What are they doing with half of the balls that they're not killing or hitting out? And so you might want to keep track of things like this. Are they hitting it to setters? Are they hitting it so hard or creating so much chaos that we're getting free balls back? Are they hitting the ball to an off blocker? Things that you know will result in more winning. It may be worth it to you to find out, particularly with your outside hitters, what's going on with all these balls they don't kill. Are they hitting them to Morgan Hens, which I can tell you is not a good strategy. We've tried it, okay? Or are they hitting it to a setter? So those of you who are kind of beyond this and are wondering what next, maybe this is a direction you go for your outsides. Okay, again, we all want to be good. So what are the best teams doing? What do the best teams do? And so again, these are those same 5 conferences. These are the champions of those 5 conferences. And so we're trying to find some patterns between them. You know, what are they all doing to be winning their leagues? And so what are some things that jump out to you in terms of similarities? Got to go for it here. Say again? Yeah. In every level of the game that I've coached, this is a number that has been kind of magic for winning, which is, can you get your kill percentage over 40? And it gets incrementally harder to go higher than 40, and it has a huge impact on the success of your team. But whether you're coaching 14s or high school, if you want to be one of the best, you will tend to find that most teams are killing it at over 40%. 4 out of 10 swings are a kill. What else is really, really close? Efficiency, kind of shockingly so, right? You've got all these teams across the country, and they're arriving at the same number. How they get there is a little different. We'll talk about that in a second. But Stanford hit 306, Minnesota hit 306, Texas hit 305, Kentucky 294, Pitt 293. Pretty shocking how narrow that spread is in terms of what standard they're reaching to be champions. And then maybe equally shocking is the rest of the league. What is the average attacking efficiency for the rest of these guys' leagues? What? 230. 230. Everyone else has almost the same average across these 5 leagues. And self-confession here, we hit 233 this year. And what did we finish in conference? Someone shoot high. No, 10 and 10. So we were average in attacking, and we were average in league. The part that differs, and is interesting to talk about and to watch if you look, is the error percentages. You look at a team like Pitt that's killing it more than anyone else in the 5 conferences. But what do they do a lot of? Make a lot of errors. 15.2% errors. Quite a bit. So they're getting to this same number, but they're doing it by maybe swinging a little more wildly, going for it. Then you've got a team like Minnesota, who's a lot lower. They're at 41% kill, but they certainly don't get blocked very much, and they don't hit it out very much. Anytime these two numbers are 10% or lower, you've got a pretty disciplined team that refuses to give opponents free points. Really important, give your team accurate goals. You know, I've caught myself saying things like, you got to kill that every time. You know, do you? Should you really kill that every time? What should you kill it at? You know, you need to give them realistic expectations, and you need to have realistic expectations for yourself. Talked about this. We talked about this. If you're in the 10 to 12, 13% range, you're a really good hitting team. As soon as you start to get 15% or higher, it's going to get really dicey. Questions on that? All right, we'll keep it going. Here's a question I think is important for you. You need to know where to spend your time. We talked about using stats to help us design practice better. So where should we spend our time? Where should we spend most time on, let's say, defense and transition? I think we probably know the answer to that. What's the answer? Defending where? Where should we spend a lot of time getting really good at defense? Defending outside hitters, okay? But how much does it happen? Do we know? So a few years ago, we did a study just in our league. How often do these attacks happen? How much time should we spend defending each zone of the court or working on transition? And here's what we found out. A front set, which would be an outside hitter, happened close to half the time, 45%. A middle set was only about 15% of it. A back set, about 26%. And then a back row set, only about 5%. If you're doing the math and this doesn't add up to 100, it's because it includes overpasses and setter dumps, which aren't there. And then maybe last, how often do we get a free ball? Only 8%. So if we have to spend time on defense for a day, we should probably spend most of our time on defending outside hitters and maybe defending opposites or slide hitters. That's going to cover 2/3 of everything we're going to see in an average match. What do we think for high school volleyball? What? Someone's confessing. More outsides, yeah. This is a club out of Arizona. This was the big tournament at Triple Crown. We studied all their teams to see how different is club volleyball and high school volleyball to Division I college volleyball. And here's what we found out. This is a 15s team, a 16s team, a 17s team, an 18s team. How often does the front set happen? About half. How often does a back set happen? About a quarter. The middle set varied a lot for these teams. Back row looks like under 10%. Then how many free balls were they getting? Quite a bit more, I would say, in the club volleyball. But still, it looks pretty similar. The game is the game, is what we'll tell our kids. And yet I'll go to club practices, and I'll go to occasional high school practices, and I'll watch teams on the West Coast, certainly not teams in Iowa, running free ball drills for an hour. Free ball plays, combinations, double quicks, all sorts of things. Some of you look guilty. That's okay. For something that's only going to happen 5 or 6 times a set. It's not a very efficient use of your time based on what's actually happening in your matches. Okay, besides having Susie's mom or dad stand in the corner and take side-out stats, there's other things you can do in practice to find out where are we at. How good are we at siding out? And one thing that we do a lot of is one-way side-out drills with a score. So we'll put a score up like 19-19 or 21-21, sometimes in just one rotation. And we'll serve one direction. And they'll compete, and we'll get a score. Oftentimes, we have to offset the score because we know if we're siding out, we're going to win most of those points. So we start at 19-19. We should win quite a bit. But then after the score is recorded, we know what we sided out at. We know where we're at, either in that row or overall. And so we're using a game. The players are playing games. Surprise, surprise, they like playing games. But they don't realize that we're trying to test them and find out where we're at. How good are we at siding out? This is a small trick, which some of you probably know. When you're writing your practice plans, if you take the number of balls you initiate in like a game of volleyball and divide it by 2, that's how long your drill is going to take with coaching and maybe a little bit of water. So just when you're designing your practices, little trick, hopefully that'll help you design better practices. In the drill we're talking about, a 19-19 game to 25 takes about 6 minutes each time. But you've got this chart, which maybe you can see a little better on the piece of paper I gave you. But what you see is we play a game. We've got the receiving team and the serving team. We've got the score. How did it end? Maybe it ended 25-22. So what is our team siding out at? Go for it. Where's Amber? Tell them to go for it. Yeah, 62%. We play shorter games based on how much time we have in practice, or if we really want to maybe do a rotation a number of times and change one person out of it. Maybe we want to find out if row 5 is better with this outside than this outside. So we'll play that game 4 or 5 times and look at the scores and be able to say, well, when we play this player, on average, we side out at this rate. We play this player, we side out here. We're going with this player. But a simple way to find out something really important without the players having to kind of think about it. Okay, there's some miscellaneous kind of stuff we've got going here just to maybe help you out with systems and lineup decisions. Some really quick things kind of all over the place. Hopefully this helps you. Average number of times you're going to rotate per set, about 13. You're going to go around about 13 times, more or less on average. If you didn't know that, it can be really helpful for those of us who habitually run out of subs without knowing it. This one's a little obvious. If you run a 5-1 and you don't sub anybody, not going to use any subs in 6 rotations. If you've got 1 DS, it's going to cost you 2 subs every 6 rotations. If you've got 2 DSs, it'll cost you 4 every 6 rotations. Again, if you run a 6-2 with 2 setter hitters because you're blessed, then you're not using any subs. If you use 1 DS, it's going to cost you 6 every time you go around. If you got 2 DSs or maybe a serving sub, it's going to cost you 8 every time you go around. So if you're trying to figure out how many subs I can use, or can I afford to put this serving sub in or this blocking sub in, I think these can help you. We spend a lot of time trying to figure out what rotations we've got to improve in. Where do we need to spend our time in practice? I think one of the biggest surprises people have is in Division I college volleyball. When you're in season, you're lucky if you get 2 practice days a week that are really meaningful, that aren't serve-in passes or on travel days. You know, if you get a Monday or a Tuesday, you're stoked, but oftentimes you only get 1 day. And so you have to be really smart about what you choose to spend time on. And so we use our rotation stats to know where we should spend our time. And this is probably the most complicated chart we're going to use here, so I'm going to go for it. I think you're still with me. We've got our rotations here on the left. We've got our serving phase of the game. We've got our receiving phase of the game. And then we've got our overall, all of rotation 1, for example. SPW, anyone want to take a shot at it, what it stands for? Serving points that we win, serving points that we lose. And so how good are we in that rotation? Serving points won minus serving points lost. Same thing in receiving. Receiving points won, receiving points lost. What's our advantage there? And then overall, if we just spend time in row 1, how many points do we win? How many points do we lose? What's our advantage there? So which rows are we not good in? 2, 4, and 6. Especially 2 and 4. We're not great. So we look at this number and we say, hey, we're not very good in 2 and 4, and in this case 6. Why aren't we good? Well, if we look at 2, we're not winning a lot of service points there. In fact, it's one of our worst. 3 was a little worse, actually. And then if we look at 2, siding out's not great either. We should have a pretty big advantage when we side out, but it's not great. We're siding out at 59% in row 2. So those things are combining. We got work to do in row 2 everywhere, serving and receiving. Row 4, the serving is actually great. It's our best server. But we need to spend time siding out because it's our worst row in serve-receive, as it is for a lot of us running a 5-1 with a freshman OH2, right? It's tough. Row 4 is brutal. Say your prayers. It's a tough one. Next question you might ask is, okay, without knowing matchups, without worrying about how you're going to stop Catherine Plummer, what do you do? Where should we start the game? What row would you start in? Yeah. These are some good things. These are our best rows that we have an advantage in. Maybe I'm looking for the best 3 rotations to start with. If I did the sum of the best 3 rows, it's looking like 5 might be the best. 13 plus 6 plus 9, 28%. Maybe I'm starting in 5, which a lot of us do anyways because it's our big banger in a 5-1. But these decisions can have a big impact, and you need to know. You need to know what rows you're not great in, either in the serving phase or the receiving phase. I've seen teams start in row 1 for an entire season when it was one of their worst rows. I've seen it in the Pac-12. See it often, actually. You got to know. I've, again, been to club practices where I've had assistants on occasion argue that we need to spend a week on tip coverage because it just drives us all crazy watching a tip hit the ground. So let's spend all our time on tip coverage without ever asking the question, how often are tips actually happening? So we looked at it. How often are people hitting the ball hard versus tipping? So where should we spend our time? Someone says tip coverage. You don't know what you're talking about. That's fine. Yeah. It's part of it. You can't just let them fall. But we certainly want to be good on stuff that's hit hard. Again, we talked about this. This is, as you can tell, a pet peeve. I've seen some really sweet free ball plays, okay, that took a long time to get in place. But you're sacrificing a lot when you do that, when it's only 8% of all of your transition attacks will happen on a free ball. Here's a big one that I think if you're trying to debate between running a 6-2 or a 5-1 that you need to think about. How often are my setters going to have to dig? And how often will somebody who I didn't pick as my setter is going to have to set the ball? And so I need to know. If you run a 6-2, it's 1 out of every 4. 1 out of every 4 is being set by somebody who you may or may not make you nervous, depending on who you pick. Okay? But it's a lot. If it's a 5-1, it's less. It's about 17%. Choose wisely. How we do? Still awake? Any questions that were either in there? We can go back to slides. Hopefully you're less terrified with the numbers. Anything you're curious about? Yeah? Yes. Yes. A serving error. So if my player misses a serve, then you can choose to assign as high a number as you want. As long as it's the same for everyone, it won't matter when you compare. That's the thing. When you choose your standards, sorry, I'll repeat the question. He said when you're doing opponent passing average, what do you do if your player misses the serve? And the answer is 2 choices. You either omit it or you give it a 5, something that you really want to penalize them for. If, you know, and that'll still tell you who your best servers are. As long as you use the same scale for everybody, it'll be okay. Yeah, good question. Yeah?
Are you taking all of your stats by hand then when you do this?
Okay, question was, are you taking all of your stats by hand? We are not taking stats by hand. When I coached club in high school, I definitely did. I probably could only do side out percentages because it was quick and it became kind of a way for me to sit down and stop talking, right? But in college, we've got people who are tracking every time the ball is touched and evaluating and rating. There's companies that send us reports that are terrifying. But yeah, not by hand as much, no. Uh-oh.
What do you want your ace to error ratio to be?
Kevin asks, what do you want your ace to error ratio to be? For our league and our level, I think it's really close to get possible to get 1-to-1. And when it comes to error percentages, if you're over 8%, you better be getting more than 8% aces. It's kind of what I talk to my players about. That's for jump float serves. If it's a jump spin server, I'm okay with that number being closer to 15%. But 8% is kind of our magic standard. If we're there, then we're pretty happy. Where were we last year, Kevin? So we were 6.3% aces, 8.9% errors. Talked to my setter about that in the first half of conference, yeah.
If your goal is to try to increase by 1%,
yeah.
51 to 52,
yeah.
It's going to have a big outcome.
Yeah.
Then you make an argument that focusing on being perfect on that 8% of free ball opportunities might have big value in the outcome.
Yeah. Bond's question was, if I only need to be 1% better to make a huge impact on my team, then those 8% of free balls matter. You know, that could be my 1%. And yeah, you're right. I don't know what the total number of those events would be, 8% of all of your, of course, that'd be on the point scoring side, or maybe on the side outside. It can happen on both phases of the game, right? Yeah, there are no little things, right? It's something that I think a lot of us say in our gym, and we want to be great at everything. We don't just stick stuff aside. But usually, there's easier fish to fry. There's usually bigger chunks of points out there, that we can get to before we get to free balls. But here I am saying all this, but then on day one of training camp, we're going to do serve bounce, right? Serve, bounce, send a free ball. Okay, here's how we handle it. So we're just not going to spend 2 hours on it, right? Getting grilled by my opponents next year. We'll be in Iowa, by the way, for those of you. I sure hope not. Okay, we made it through math class. Thank you guys. Appreciate your time.